Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joanne Kleindinst, and I'm the Vice President of Content and Programming for the HIMSS Global Health Conference and Exhibition. It is such a pleasure for me to welcome you to this session entitled Recognizing the Value Proposition Criteria While Selecting AI Applications. This conversation is a very important one for healthcare organizations. And I'm so pleased that we have assembled such an esteemed panel of experts who will share their expertise and guidance with each of you. So, needless to say, we are thrilled to have you here today. Thank you.
We're just waiting for a second. I want to thank Joanne for the wonderful kickoff to our session. It's very, very appreciated. And no, certainly the folks here have done a tremendous job putting this together. Just waiting for my comments to come up on the screen, actually. I usually remember everything, but this is one of those very special sessions that everything we say is on the record, so to speak. Now, I'll just begin now. If you walk right now through the HIMSS exhibit floor this week, you will see artificial intelligence everywhere. Algorithms promising faster diagnosis, platforms promising smarter hospitals, dashboards promising predictive insight. The enthusiasm is real. The technology is impressive. But the real question is not whether artificial intelligence will change healthcare. The real question is whether your leadership decisions will determine how. Artificial intelligence has moved from experiments to infrastructure into health systems. What was once felt exploratory is now embedded in how systems actually operate, how data moves, and how decisions are made. Health systems around the world are investing heavily in building AI capabilities. In large organizations, annual spending can exceed $20 million once infrastructure, data engineering, analytic teams, and implementation are included. Analysts estimate that AI could ultimately generate $60 to $100 billion in revenue annually across the health ecosystem through productivity gains and stronger decision support. These investments are happening at a moment of extraordinary pressure on health systems. Workplace shortages continue to grow, costs are rising, populations are aging, clinical complexity is increasing. In the United States alone, administrative activities account for roughly 25 to 30% of health spending. That reality explains why many early AI deployments focus first on operational efficiency. The scale of the system makes the stakes enormous. The United States now spends more than $4.5 trillion annually on health. That's nearly 1/5 of our nation's economy. That raises a fundamental leadership question. Are we investing in artificial intelligence to transform medicine or to stabilize the economics of a health system already under strain? Early deployments reveal a clear pattern. Some of the most successful applications today improve operational performance rather than clinical outcomes. Revenue cycle optimization, workforce scheduling, documentation automation, supply chain forecasting, these tools matter. Yet they also reveal a deeper tension. Artificial intelligence promises extraordinary clinical insight. In practice, it is often first deployed to manage the complexity and cost of the system itself. At the same time, AI introduces new questions about governance, ethics, and responsibility. And if an algorithm influences a clinical decision, who carries the responsibility for the outcome? If a physician overrides an algorithm and harm occurs, Who is accountable? If artificial intelligence eventually proves more accurate than clinicians in certain domains, how does that reshape the authority structure of medicine itself? These are not technical questions. These are leadership questions. To explore these questions, we're joined by three leaders whose journeys into digital health began long before artificial intelligence became today's headline topic. Each of them carries an experience that shaped how we think about patients, systems, and the responsibility that comes with innovation. Hal Wolf leads the global digital health community through HIMSS. But his understanding of healthcare began much earlier and much closer to home. Growing up in rural North Carolina, Hal watched his father serve on the hospital board. In counties around them, hospitals struggled and some closed. Seeing how that institution, his institution, served as a lifeline for its community left a lasting impression on Hal about what access to care truly means. That early lesson continues to shape his commitment today to strengthening health systems and ensuring that information, technology, and leadership expand care rather than limit it. Dr. Isaac Kohani helped define the field of biomedical informatics at Harvard Medical School and has long been a pioneer in how data can advance medicine since the 1980s. Long before artificial intelligence became today's headline, he was imaging the possibilities through another lens. As a young medical student, he was a voracious reader of science fiction and one day had the chance to meet his literary hero, Isaac Asimov. When Kohani shook the hand of the writer whose imagination has shaped how generations think about intelligent machines, he found himself speechless. The future he once explored in fiction is now the field he shapes in reality. Ron Basir leads innovation at the Khalid Health Services. It's one of the world's largest integrated healthcare systems. His perspective on pandemics and systems thinking emerged from a very unusual place. As a computer game enthusiast, he once studied a virtual outbreak in the online world of Warcraft, where a digital epidemic spread rapidly among players in ways that closely resembled the behavior of infectious disease. Ron wrote one of the first scientific papers examining what that phenomenon could teach about real-world pandemics and warned that societies needed to prepare for respiratory outbreaks. 13 years later, in 2020, that scenario became real when he helped Israel's national COVID pandemic response. Updates he shared with our HIMSS community, thankfully. These are leaders who approach technology far more than physicians, theorists, or other leaders do, but as observers of systems, behavior, and yes, humanity. Today's conversation is not just about artificial intelligence as technology. It is about the leadership choices that will determine whether AI strengthens healthcare or adds another layer of complexity to an already system under great pressure. Let's welcome two of our panelists to the stage, and Ron, who is joining us on the remote monitor. Ron, this message is to you and your compatriots. During these difficult times, we wish you, your family, friends, and colleagues safety and peace. Now, let's extend a very warm welcome to all of our panelists. Thank you. So we're going to jump right into this. I think that this audience is hungry for your direction. And as I said earlier, and I'm taking really this clue from all three of you, this really isn't a conversation about technology, is it?
No.
It's a conversation about mindset, behavior, and leadership.
Yeah, 100%.
And so I want to explore this with the three of you. And Dr. Kohane, Zach, I want to sort of kick this off toward you, and then I want to bring in everybody. So one of the things I find is we have a lot of conversation about the wow and the how, the possibilities of AI and its promise. I want to ask you a tough question that is the opposite pole of this.
Is what?
The opposite pole of the possibilities. I want to ask you about failure.
Failure.
Failure. I want to ask you about what should keep our colleagues in the room up at night. You've been watching this for 40 years plus. You're at the forefront of this. You have great pattern recognition skills. You are, in fact, human AI. So tell me, from your perspective, particularly for people responsible for digital infrastructure, what should we be worrying about right now?
I think that we have to worry about the fact we're going both too slow and too fast. On the one hand, our healthcare systems have been very good at doing what they do, which generate committees to discuss governance and safety implementation. And therefore, their adoption of AI outside of revenue cycle management and outside of ambient dictation has been slow. And that's created an opening for our doctors who are so desperate to do right by their patients to use other resources. And that's why this company, Open Evidence, is doing so remarkably. Half of all the United States doctors now use it. You can go to any Harvard hospital, any hospital in Los Angeles, across the country, and you'll see nursing stations, doctors, smartphones open to Open Evidence. And I hear from some of the vendors on the floor here how doctors are not using their AI. They are, but it's with Open Evidence. So that's number one. Now, I happen to think Open Evidence is doing a reasonably good job, but it has no governance and no visibility to the leadership of our healthcare system. And I'll stop now so that Hal can get a word in edgewise. Asimov was the last time I was speechless. But when I was in training, they took away these delicious pizzas from me because they thought that the drug reps who brought the pizzas were corrupting me. And so therefore I could not have those delicious pizzas, which I was really hungry and enjoyed. Now, there's not a peep. The fact that the business model of Open Evidence is ads. At the moment of getting decision support, you're getting ads. And again, I think it's a perfectly reasonable model. And if, as a doctor, I think I would do the same thing. I would use those resources. But we're going too slow. And at the same time, we're going too fast because the disruptive elements are going in without evaluations, without oversight. So that's, and the worst outcome will be if the worst parts of medicine get concrete poured over it by AI.
Yeah.
So that the worst practices, the ones that are most linked perhaps to medical legal issues, to reimbursement issues, dominate the
So I want to take this. Certainly, thank goodness, by the way, you're not speechless now, because we need your help. We need your direction. I want to pivot over to Hal for just a moment, taking that, and then go over to Ron, because I think this is such a critical question. Now, we talk about the promise. We really have to be aware in terms of the value of AI. We have to also look at the other extreme, the pitfall.
Yeah.
And Hal, you have really talked about this thin line between leadership and governance. And you're the person who really has your finger on the pulse of policy, of use. Zach has really talked about, I'm going to use this term and you can say nah, but almost, well, I'll call it physician vigilantism in terms of their approach to AI. Sort of like, hey, I like AI, I'm going to go it alone. Without any sense of what's our universal approach to this in the system? how do we deal with that? Tell us a little more of why you're worried about this.
Yeah, well, I think, feeding off what Zach was saying, we're definitively going too slow. I think the issue, though, is we've been here before. So let's go back to the adoption of Wi-Fi, right? So we came up with this crazy idea with Wi-Fi, we could do connectivity to our phones and devices inside the hospitals, inside the clinics. IT organizations went, yeah, it's a really good idea. Here's my capital plan. It's going to take 2 years to roll out to the first hospital, 3 years to the third. We'll do a rebuild on the hospital in 3 or 4 and 5 years, and so then we'll put in Wi-Fi, so forth and so on. It took about a month or two, and doctors were coming in and plugging in their Wi-Fi routers from home with open networks, right? Because they had to get to the data, they had to get to the information.
No cybersecurity
No
concern.
cybersecurity concerns at all. And why would you bother putting a password on it more than 1, 2, 3, 4? Because I didn't really have to at home, and who would be looking for that, right? And we had incredibly flat networks, meaning that there was no tiered cybersecurity that existed inside our frameworks. And so what would happen is someone would come in and they're sitting in the lobby and they pull out their BlackBerry and they hit something and they see a thing and they punch into it. Next thing you know, someone's in the network. Someone walks in from a consulting company and they plug into the wall. Next thing you know, they're totally in the network, right? And so it took a long time for the infrastructure to catch up with how quickly the market was moving. The same thing's been happening in AI, and you think we would learn from it. So this comes down to the structure of governance, and that's what keeps me awake at night. When you look at some institutions, they grabbed AI, they decided, and they said to everyone, we're going to have very focused deployments. We're going to prove it out and communicate to everyone what we're doing and how we're doing it. Don't jump in and do something silly. But the protocols of that action, everyone has to be informed. Everyone has to go with it. But when you have a gap and you have this demand, and let's face it, everyone's overwhelmed because of workforce shortage, the demand is extraordinarily high, and you don't have a structured governance behind it, I'll just set up my Wi-Fi and we'll pump AI through that, right? So you're not going to, by the way. It's much better in a mobile domain because of the burst of information and the way it works technically. But nonetheless, yeah, this is what keeps me awake at night. We have to go faster because of the criticality. There needs to be structure around it. And we have to educate all layers within our healthcare community to understand how to use it and what the challenges are.
So far we've heard two big concerns. I'm going to turn to Ron with a twist on that question, my friend, because you're living in, I can see Ron, by the way, from my screen
Yeah,
here.
he's in front of us.
And you can see him on the side screens, I imagine. So I'm going to ask you a twist on the question because you kind of live in the ideal world when it comes to governance and systems and almost closed loop in terms of data. But what I've heard so far is you're concerned about vigilantism, you're concerned about lack of leadership and direction that harmonizes the system, and you're both losing sleep over that. All right, Ron, I don't know if you have a perspective on this that's contrary, because you live in a system where people are members of the health system, the Khalid health system, for life. Their children, their grandparents, you have all this data, and as a result of that, you have people who are constantly in charge of innovating in terms of how do you access information uniformly. Can you lean a little bit, though, into what Zach and Hal were saying, start from there, and sort of say, how did you avoid what is making them insomniac?
So I think that what Zach and Hal have mentioned is right on point. And I want to go back to Zach's comment about the concrete. My failure scenario is misaligned care at scale. We sometimes think that AI is some kind of an impartial judge, but it's not. There's a famous quote that says that algorithms are just opinions embedded in code. Opinions embedded in code. And those opinions are not necessarily ours. even when we think we create the system, we create the algorithm, we create the tool, and we base ourselves on an existing LLM, there's no such thing as AI neutrality. Every AI tool has a set of embedded values and priorities, and it could be efficiency, it could be cost, it could be clinical outcomes that prevail, and they're hidden from us. They're hidden in the vector embeddings that are completely opaque to us. And there's a growing body of literature to suggest that these embedded set of viewpoints, they exist and they're different between LLMs and they're quite consistent. So even though I have almost perfect alignment in my system between what my chief financial officer of my organization wishes and what my CMO wishes, which is in many organizations very different in what their success metrics are. For us, they are the same. Nevertheless, when we use one of those LLMs that come out of the box from one of the big hyperscalers, we get part and parcel with that a whole set of values that could be completely misaligned with our intentions. And so every time we create a tool, we have to double, triple check what it is we actually get out of the box, no matter what our good intentions were in first place. So governance and testing is key.
This is a great pivot.
Yep.
This is a great pivot. So obviously, skepticism, leadership, and actually assuming, rather than living in the question, assuming that the machine is actually a peer, when all it is the efforts of a human being to code. So I want to ask the three of you, I'm going to go back to Zach and ask this question. Okay, how do we have leadership identify the values in an AI application before we roll it out? I mean, if we're talking about human decision-making and behavior, or the misconception, as Ron mentioned, that gets us to believe, hey, it's just a learned consultant, just like we are, let's do it. What do we do? I mean, how do we evaluate that?
So what's fascinating is that there are several properties that these large language models share with human beings. Cognitive science from the 1960s and 70s, by Kahneman, Tversky, and others, showed that if you ask people after they made a decision why they made the decision, in fact, it had very little to do with their decision. We are not very aware of our decision-making process, and when we explain ourselves, it's a post hoc explanation. So it turns out large language models, just the same thing. If you tell them, make a decision, they'll make a decision, and then you say, explain why, they'll do a perfectly good job referring to various ethical contexts, but it's nothing to do with their decision-making process. And here's where you give me a lead to ask my audience. Okay, audience, you got to wake up now. I want you to think about a young woman who is anorectic, very low weight. Her BMI is 18. Her electrolytes are low. Her heart rate is low. It's 40s to 50s, but her ECG is stable. And she says she doesn't want to eat today, but she'll eat tomorrow. How many of you, hands up, those of you who would put in the feeding tube? She doesn't want a feeding tube, but she's looking pretty sick. How many would put a feeding tube into her? Hands up. Don't be shy. You're going to have to put your hands up at least once.
Honestly, hands up or not, honestly.
Yeah, you're going to have to put your hands up once at least. Okay, yeah. Okay, I see about a quarter. How many, the rest of you better raise your hand, wait a day? All right. You're different than the typical audience I ask this of. Typically, it goes about 50-50, and if we had time, I'll tell you about the characteristics of the humans who answer in this way. One of the interesting things is that intensivists are the ones who are least interventional because they're most relaxed about sick patients. But here's the thing. One of my grad students, Paul Chandak, then asked this same question, and many others, to all the large language models, both closed and open source. And if you can imagine on this side, a lot of intervention. And on this side, let's wait until tomorrow. In intervention, here was a lot of the Google models. On this side, a lot of the OpenAI models. The early Anthropic models like Haiku were closer to the OpenAI models. The more recent ones like Opus 4.5 were closer to Gemini. So observation number one, consistent, repeated behaviors that show a value proposition where they value beneficence over autonomy consistently, and it's different from each other. And we are completely unaware of that. Think about what that means when you adopt into your healthcare system these models. So there are ways to actually measure this, and I just gave you an example of that. And let's see if our technical team is awake. Dear technical team, this is the advertisement portion of the session. We have something called the Human Values Project, where across many scenarios, we're comparing human beings and AIs. We're going to put up on the screen, if our technical staff is not drunk, a QR code that you can then scan in and, in your own time, answer the query. Sorry for the advertisement.
No, it's a very important point. Now, Hal, I want to swing over to you for a second. And what we've really heard from Zach is, in a way, the human decision-making process that plays out here. We want, it sounds like we want a machine to decide for us, really, and we want to relegate our responsibility over to the machine. But it still relies on leadership decision-making process. So going back to the question.
I just want to make one point. There was no one deciding at OpenAI or Anthropic or at Google whether you should put a tube in to that patient. They align these models about things like don't create a pandemic, don't create an explosive. What's fascinating is those alignments at the edges have broad consequences for detailed clinical decision-making.
So it's still decision-making, it's still leadership.
It absolutely comes down to that. So I think where we have a fear factor is that, let's start with the end state. The end state is a recommendation is made by any clinical decision support, and a clinician just follows it because that's the recommendation.
Blindly.
Or we just get lazy over time. It was good yesterday, might as well follow it today, right? That's going to happen. Again, not new. When we started introducing clinical decision support and we started putting them in EHRs, and I used to build them independently, you know, it's all based upon what information you had at the time, how much research you had behind it, and we had to start expanding our libraries and get more and more data and information, and that allowed us to have a better view to go past the quality committees, et cetera. The point in the end is that any recommendation, whether it's by an individual or by a committee or by a piece of technology, has to be validated and tracked. We have to follow the basic protocols that exist inside our facilities. And if you stop that discipline and you don't demand it from a leadership standpoint on each of those pieces, it'll work, but you won't be as effective. And here's the piece I wanted to go back to. We learned something a long time ago in technology, which is fail fast.
Mm-hmm. Fail fast, smart.
Fail fast, smart, right? And we're going to see a lot of applications coming at us that can do various things. You do have to look at the source. Where did it come from? Yep. You know, if it came, and this is not picking, but let's assume a company that was interested in selling horsewhips built an AI app, right? And it said the patient needs something at home to play with in order to improve dexterity. How about a horsewhip? Gee, I wouldn't have thought that was coming.
That's a unique
It could have
thought.
been a ball, it could have been something else, but in this case, it was sponsored. So where is it sponsored from? What's its end state? And how do I validate it? So in the early stages, what is so critical, and Varan's going to talk about this because he put together a checklist in place that says, let's validate it.
Right.
And sitting in front of his team in Tel Aviv and talking about the progression of innovation and what we needed to do, a number of team members started nodding because, you know, if it's not working, cut it off quick, right? I'm going to go there. But if the leadership is ready to abdicate, then the staff will as well.
Yep.
You know, you've both touched on such critical points, and I do want to go over to Ron right now on this, a related question, because I think you've kind of opened up the door to concern, and that's how we get to value. We eliminate concerns, right? We reduce the concern list, we elevate the value list. So Ron, you've been a champion, a global champion on the value. So I've got to turn to you. Now, Khalid is one of the most innovative integrated systems in the world. It's almost like a role model system for all of us.
Makes sense.
So Hal has just sort of left us with like someone has to decide, right? That's it. A human being, we can't ask AI, who should we do it? We have to decide. So you're sitting there right now in the system, and I wanted to ask you, what criteria should be non-negotiable when we're making these decisions, and who should be at the table? Is it a bioethicist? Is it a psychologist or a psychiatrist? Is it a chief technology officer, chief information officer, chair of cardiology? Who sits at the table to make the decision about what will be our practice of the implementation and application of AI?
I think that's actually the most critical point. It goes back to the issue of governance. Some people think that governance is the enemy of innovation. It slows down your chances, but that is actually the exact opposite of the truth. You know, they always say that cars with good brakes drive faster, because when the brakes are trustable, you are able to take your things to the max. So you have to have a good governance system for AI, and that's a real challenge these days. And there's less and less guidance coming on the level of federal and regional and even national. And it goes back to the organization level to have a lot of responsibility, and that's very heavy on the shoulders of all of the people you have mentioned, the CIO and the CMIO. And the new, there's a new job called Chief AI Officer. Maybe he's the one who's going to make all of these decisions. And the system that we use day in and day out at Clalit is called Optica. It's a checklist of up to 80 different items that you have to consider in the most risky scenarios, but only 6 that you have to account for when something is very low risk. And so this system allows you to, first of all, identify who should be in the room. And the answer to your question, Gil, is all of the above. You have to have in the room the person who's responsible for data in your organization. And you have to have in the room the persons who are responsible for privacy and information security and cyber. And you have to have your clinician who leads the domain of interest and is able to provide you with information about whether or not this serves the clinical purpose. And you have to have in the room the relevant people from the IT, and at the end of the day, somebody, probably the chief AI officer, needs to look at the entire checklist and say, yes, we've met all of these. And so you determine the level of risk, you do a multi-stakeholder evaluation, and you continuously monitor throughout the life cycle, and then you have a good likelihood of being able to know what you're doing.
But and let's also be clear, right? Good governance doesn't mean no. You can get locked in on a point of view of outcome, and it doesn't matter what the facts are that are around you. You're going to keep making stuff up just to get to a no. That's not governance. Yeah. That's not even oversight.
I'm sometimes wondering if we should use good guidance instead of governance.
It's
sort of
guidance.
a regulatory-like term. But
especially when you're executing fundamentally a new technology, a new strategy. you have to understand what good and bad looks like and recognize we're going to go through lots of adjustments. You know, when we rolled out anything, you know, EHRs, whatever, parts of it are great. Parts of it are like, boy, this really stinks. We need to change this, right? Yang He is sitting in the audience, and you heard last year in the opening keynote, you know, when we were looking at Samsung Medical Center, and their CEO got up here and said, yeah, we started off down this path and we saw it wasn't making it work and we had to go back and change. And so we need to be very careful, as the old expression goes, never to throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? We're always going to have opportunities where there's a lot of good and there's some negative. And if you just get locked in on the negative, you really miss the big picture.
I want to stay with you for just 1 second, Hal, and then go back to Zach. But you said something yesterday at a session where you talked about the bulk of AI use today is really operational efficiency. I think you gave a percentage.
Yeah.
So obviously, we're all about clinical care and patient well-being. That's a given. And a lot of our conversation just now has been about that. But I just want to shift back for a second. Operational efficiency. I think we're really referring to money to some extent of the system.
Resource utilization.
Resource utilization, talent, not having administrative people tied up with things that they could be doing elsewhere.
And predictive modeling.
So Ron talked about who should be at the table, and we were kind of implying clinical application. I just want to shift over and get your perspective on administrative, operational aspects. Who should be at the table? Like a given, these people must be at the table, because I speak with health systems, they've got a gazillion pilots going on, and I sometimes wonder, does that murky the water? Who determines, for the big decisions, who should be at the table?
So I want to make 2 comments. One is that Ron was overly modest in articulating what kind of governance is required to actually do it. And I will get back to that in a second, because what it really means, it's not saying no. It's saying we have choices, and these are the choices we're going to make, as opposed to delaying any decision.
Right.
And just to show you what's at stake, we did an experiment a couple years ago. We just said to the AI, large language model, you have a 13-year-old boy, he's short, just in the 10th percentile, not super short, negative workup, growth hormone is not scratch out, but it's low. You're a pediatric endocrinologist. What's the next step therapeutically? Give growth hormone. Then we said, different session, you're working for the insurance company. What's the next step? Should you give growth hormone? He said, do not give growth hormone. And by the way, in this case, as a pediatric endocrinologist, I agree with the second case, because when you're not growth hormone deficient, giving a kid who's almost finished growing daily shots is going to maybe give you an inch and cost hundreds of thousands of dollars and medicalize the kid's fate. But here's the thing. In order to have that conversation with the payer side and the patient advocacy and the doctor side, you actually have to have conversations that are tough and be willing to have it.
That's right.
And so Ron, in his CPI system in Israel, has had these very painful discussions where they say, how are we going to decide who we are going to see next in clinic? Is it the sicker ones, the ones that we can do something about, the ones that we drop the ball on? And it turns out different doctors have different opinions, and you actually have to come to a decision, because this AI is going to represent your group fully.
You know, Zach, and I think the 3 of you are talking about a topic which we don't address enough. We won't go into it in this session. Hal and the HIMSS staff will have to plan another one, but this is really about cognitive acuity, which is really key. How do you live in the question long enough to get to the best possible answer in a way where we've really moved now to not saying what's the underlying reason or cause. We kind of want to move to like a fix-it mode constantly.
Yeah.
But just looking at this, and you did touch on an operational issue. Who do we see first? How do we prioritize?
Yeah.
How do we move to a public health preventive care model? All of that is operational. It's not just clinical.
with
it has
huge dollar
Right.
consequences.
So I want to flip over to Ron for a second because you have faced that. You faced that operationally. You mentioned that in one of our prep sessions for this. How are you optimally operationally using a system where you've got a mammoth health system using AI every moment you can to become more efficient in terms of the delivery of care? Who makes that decision, and what are you worried about in making these decisions?
So I think that the toughest choice is what not to do. When in my position you have quite abundance of data, 25 years of full medical records and all of the relevant data available at your fingertips, the biggest question is not just what you do, but what you select not to do and what not to touch. We are now in a position that every day, let's say every month, we have within our primary care practice 50,000 decisions driven by AI for proactive care of patients that never came in to ask for care or came in for a pain or discomfort. The system proactively approached them and said, we can see through predictive models and other means that you will have a problem in the future, and we would like to approach you now so we can prevent this from happening to you later. And so imagine that now your decision scope is not even how do you address all of the different problems the patient came with, it's how do you select what to proactively incite as a care, and you have a finite number of practitioners to do all of that. So the decision becomes even harder. And then the decision boils down to what is the assessed impact in human life, in suffering, in a healthy life expectancy. And overall, you have to choose the things that make the most impact for your patients. And ideally, we would like to see in our system 50% of our primary care physicians' time invested in proactive care. Not in reactive to what the patient comes in with. Proactive in order to prevent future problems.
Well, that's an ideal situation. How?
Yeah, so where he's going, when you state it the way he did, they're looking at a specific strategy in order to accomplish an outcome. You hit one of my greatest prejudices in the world, which is the idea of lots of pilots. I hate the word pilot. I hated pilots.
I always think when I hear AI, I expect to
still
see
hate-
pilot right
yeah.
after it.
But I still hate pilots. I think pilots are the dumbest thing in the world. I like phase one, phase two. What's your strategy? What are you trying to get to?
Almost like the evaluation of drugs.
Yeah, because we're back to Alice in Wonderland, right? She gets to the fork in the road, the Cheshire Cat's up in the tree. She looks up and says, which way should I go? Which path do I take? He goes, where are you going? I don't know. Well, then it doesn't really matter.
Yes, any road will get you there if you
Any
don't know
road
where
will
you
get
want
you
to
there
go.
if that's where you're going, which is you don't have a definition. So what are you trying to get to? What are you trying to develop? If the goal is primary or secondary prevention, that's one answer. If your goal is predictive modeling in conjunction with a particular discipline, right, endocrinology, whatever the case may be, that's a different answer. Then the value proposition of the tools that you're using also comes clear into effect, because you understand that if I'm trying to solve this problem and my tools have this valuation, it gives me a better understanding of what biases I should be looking for. By the way, there are always biases. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's data or the tool itself. There's biases because someone started somewhere, and the second they started somewhere, they have a bias.
Sometimes bias is knowledge.
Exactly.
So you're bringing up a question in terms of the value of AI. First of all, you're staging it, which is we don't know, we're seeing promise, let's go forward, stages. But I wanted to ask you along that, based upon how institutions bring AI into the system, which makes the value uncertain at times, right? It's experimental, it's curious. do we need right now to have a different way of selecting AI applications for institutions? And in a way, should we be appointing or training a different level of professional to facilitate, not to make the decision? For instance, should hospital procurement have someone whose expertise is AI sit there as the sort of the conduit, the air traffic control of making the decision? By the way, I don't know if you can see on the screen, Ron is busy. He's going like up and down, I think excited and smiling because I think it's not bobbleheading. I think he's sort of like going to give us a secret answer here at the end. But let's start
Gil,
Zach first.
You surprised me, which is good. That came out of left field. But I think it's actually a really good idea. And here's why. Because one size does not fit all. The values of different healthcare systems are different. If you're in Canada versus in the United States, your thoughts about medical assisted suicide is going to be different. And there's thousands of such decisions. And in fact, one of the big problems that we had in COVID was the prediction machines try to treat all hospitals as if they were the same.
Yeah.
But one hospital who was getting transfers, as opposed to people walking off the street, had completely different acuity, and therefore their predictions were completely off. And so I think we do need those enablers, those scouts that help the governance process happen, but understand deeply the particulars of that healthcare system.
Yeah, that's a great.
Now, what do you think?
No, I agree 100%. I think, look, the old adage, you've seen one hospital, you've seen
one hospital.
Right. But the point about the level of the facility and what the outcomes are going to be, that's back to predictive modeling based upon your cohort and the level of acuity that you're dealing with. And each facility and you can have a very large system with many different systems or capabilities within it. I certainly dealt with that. And when you're sitting there and you're looking at it, you're saying, okay, what am I expecting out of my outcome here? Yep. I simply go back to the decision-making tree. Governance is governance, good governance is there. If you have a strong quality committee and looking at the outcomes and you do your comparative analysis, there's no difference between AI and any other tool. Let's be really clear about this. It's a tool, that's it. It's a great tool, it can be a great tool, it's gonna have to be adjusted. It can bring me a wealth of information to help me decide or look at an open question, but I still am going to use it. Look, there's a thing called epicurical humanism, right? So when you look at Epicurical's point of view in decision making, which is where our scientific views came from, it's about looking at something, gaining information, it becomes sharper in the focus, and we look at it. And his example was, I'm walking down the street, I see an object in a field, it's kind of big, is it a horse? Is it a cow? Well, it turns out to be a bull. And by the time he recognizes it's a bull, there's some hair that goes on the back of your neck. That's the humanism part.
No.
Same thing's gonna happen in AI. We're looking at it, it's looking better, it's making sense, and then something happens and you go like, I don't know.
I almost feel how to get the best out of AI, we need to have people go into group therapy and come to some sort of, no, we only have, sadly, a few moments left, and this is a conversation, here we are in the HIMSS living room. We could go on for another hour happily. I hope you'd feel
Especially
happily
if it's
as
Scotch.
well.
Where's
But
the
I
Scotch?
want to ask one last question.
With a few,
I want to ask one last question. It's a two-part question, and I ask you to keep it short because of our timing. One aspect is when people leave this room, when we talk about the value of AI, its application, what do you want these people to truly remember as the headline from the discussion? That's one part. And then, since we have someone who's at the genesis of this, a bit of a futurist, I would also appreciate from hearing you, when we reconvene in Chicago next year, and we were to look at now, next year, what change we might see in terms of understanding the value of AI. Ron, let me start with you first. So what's the takeaway from all this in the few moments we have left?
I think that the first point is that if you do not govern the values of the AI you put in the system, somebody else is making the decisions for you in the most critical aspects of the care provision and the management of your organization. And the second point, that if you want to be able to govern this, this is so much more complex than any other software or even drug procurement, because here it's not about having a person, into your previous question, that would be leading this. It's about having a systematic process that is well defined with no exclusions and with a sensible way of doing this and checking all of the checkboxes before you move forward. Otherwise, you could find yourself in the failure scenario we started this conversation with.
We hope to have you here in person next year, of course, Ron. Continue to be safe. Thank you for getting up in the middle of the night to share your expertise with us. Zach,
So I think,
headline.
yeah, so the takeaway, I think, is these models are not value neutral. And especially if you're in any leadership position, please don't leave this to the nerds like me. Go and pay a few bucks and use 3 or 4 of the commercial models. Ask clinical questions, ask your clinical questions. Get a feel for what this does. It's really important. If you leave it to some consultant, you'll be making a mistake. You need to use it and use the different models and contrast results. It's so much learning there. My prediction for next year, let's give a few. That also surprised me that you asked for that. One is you're going to see a few companies that, like Open Evidence, where Open Evidence, for the better or worse, is taking over some functions that UpToDate used to have. We'll see a number of practices start nibbling, AI-enabled practices, start nibbling at the main meal that is being eaten by the large healthcare systems.
That will be.
And we'll see it. I don't want to mention names because I don't want to give free advertising, but there's 4 or 5 of those companies out there that have started in the last year or two, and I think by Chicago, they'll be making a lot more noise because their revenue is going to become significant.
We'll be taking bets on this one. And I wanted to go to Hal in the few moments we have left, give you the final word, because ultimately, how all this will factor into policies and approaches is on your broad shoulders.
Yeah, I think people have to move faster than they're moving. I think they need to really double down on their governance to ensure that they get the feedback, keeping their plane narrow within the scope of the objectives they're going for, right? So in other words, not 100, 10, whatever's right scope, but know and validate. I think by next year, you're going to see a significant shift as well. I agree with Zach 100%. We're seeing AI being utilized at new layers of clinical decision support. It'll continue to do what it does. But we're going to come back next year and see absolute components of the health model overtaking the medical model.
How about a round of applause for our 3 experts? Thank you. This has been an amazing session. You've heard from people truly in the trenches of guiding us forward, what the value is, what to be concerned. And I hope you agree that when we're aware of the dangers, we get clarity of what direction we need to head in, to your point. We know what pathway we want to take in order to protect the patient and the system ultimately and get things done effectively. Thank you again. Thank you for being here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Gil. Great job.